The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn of the Riverside Country Club in Charleston, South Carolina. I stood at the edge of the reception area, nursing a glass of sweet tea and watching my family prepare for what they called the wedding of the century. My niece Sarah was marrying Derek Matthews, a successful financial advisor who wore his achievements like badges of honor. "Uncle Mike, could you move those chairs to the back section?" my sister Janet called out, not even looking in my direction. At 52, I had become accustomed to being the family's go-to guy for manual labor and little else. The quiet uncle, who showed up, helped out, and disappeared into the background. I lifted the heavy wooden chairs without complaint. My movements efficient and precise habits ingrained from decades of discipline that my family knew nothing about. They saw a middle-aged man who worked maintenance at the local high school, lived alone in a modest apartment, and never talked much about his past. What they didn't see was the reason behind my measured steps, the way I automatically scanned every room I entered, or why I always positioned myself with clear sight lines to all exits. "Dad, why didn't we ask Uncle Mike to give a speech?" I overheard my nephew Tommy ask Janet's husband, Paul, as they arranged the head table. Paul shrugged, adjusting his tie. What would Mike talk about? He's never been married, doesn't have kids, and barely says 2 words at family dinners. Derek's got 3 best men giving speeches, plus both fathers. That's plenty. Sarah floated by in her pristine white dress. Looking radiant but stressed. "Uncle Mike," she called, genuine warmth in her voice despite the chaos. "Thank you so much for helping set up. You're a lifesaver." I smiled and nodded. Sarah had always been differentiated, actually saw me, asked about my day, remembered details about my life that others forgot. Truth about who I was before I became the family's reliable handyman. Derek appeared beside his bride, like tall and imposing in his tailored tuxedo. At 28, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never truly been tested. His handshake was firm but performative, his smile practiced. "Mike Wright, thanks for all the help today. Sarah tells me you're quite the jack of all trades." "Doing what needs doing," I replied quietly. "Well, we appreciate it. Real men step up when family needs them." Derek's tone was patronizing, though I doubt he realized it. He was the type who measured masculinity in degrees and promotions, who believed strength came from corner offices and stock portfolios. As the afternoon wore on, I watched Derek hold court with his groomsmen, all of them successful young professionals who spoke in acronyms and quarterly projections. They discussed their weekend warrior activities, rock climbing at indoor gyms, CrossFit competitions, and tactical shooting courses that they treated like expensive hobbies. "Bro, did you see that Navy SEAL documentary on Netflix?" One of them asked Derek as I arranged centerpieces nearby. "Those guys are absolute machines. I bet I could handle their training, though. I mean, how hard could it be?" Derek laughed, "Right? I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for 6 months now. So the mental discipline is probably the same. It's all about pushing through when your mind wants to quit." I kept my expression neutral, continuing my work as they discussed what they imagined. Military service was like, they spoke with the casual confidence of men who had never been hungry, cold, or truly afraid. Men who had never held a dying friend in their arms, or made decisions where the wrong choice meant people didn't come home. The rehearsal dinner began as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I sat at the family table, relegated to the end where conversations died and jokes went to fade away. The speeches began, Eric's father talking about legacy and achievement, Derek's best man sharing college stories that seemed more impressive in the telling than they likely were in reality. When it was over, I helped stack chairs and fold tables while the younger generation headed to the hotel bar. Janet approached me as I loaded my pickup truck with the leftover decorations. "Mike, you don't have to come to the actual wedding tomorrow if you don't want to," she said, her tone suggesting she hoped I would decline. "I know these big events aren't really your thing, and we'll have professional staff handling everything." "Sarah asked me to be there," I replied simply. "So I'll be there." Janet sighed. "Of course you will. Just try to mingle a little, okay? Maybe talk to some people. You're part of this family too." As I drove home through Charleston's quiet, streets, I thought about what she'd said. Part of the family, but not really. Present, but not included. Helpful, but not valued. It was a role I'd accepted long ago when I came back from my last deployment and decided that some stories were better left untold, some chapters better left closed. My apartment was sparse but clean, every item in its designated place. On my nightstand sat a single photograph of my SEAL team from 15 years ago. 8 men grinning at the camera after a successful mission in Afghanistan. 3 of them never made it home. 2 more didn't survive the peace that followed. I was the quiet uncle now, the one who fixed things and stayed in the background. Tomorrow would be no different, or so I thought. None of us could have predicted what Derek would discover, or how one conversation would change. Everything my family thought they knew about the man they'd overlooked for so many years. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and clear, with Charleston's historic charm on full display. Spanish moss swayed gently in the harbor breeze as I arrived at the country club 2 hours before the ceremony. Old habits die hard, and I'd learned long ago that early arrival meant fewer surprises and better situational awareness. I found Derek, alone on the club's back terrace, staring out at the Cooper River. His confident demeanor from the night before had been replaced by something more vulnerable, pre-wedding nerves, perhaps, or the weight of the commitment he was about to make. His tuxedo was perfectly pressed, but his hand shook slightly as he adjusted his cufflinks. "Beautiful morning for it," I said, joining him at the railing. Derek startled, then forced a smile. "Oh, hey, Mike. Yeah, couldn't ask for better weather." He paused, studying me with new attention. "Can I ask you something? Sarah mentioned you were in the military. What branch?" It was an innocent question, one I'd deflected hundreds of times over the years. But something about Derek's genuine nervousness, the way he was reaching out for connection before the biggest day of his life, made me reconsider my usual evasive response. "Navy," I said simply. "Really? That's awesome. How long did you serve?" 22 years? Derek's eyebrows shot up. 22 years? Wow. What did you do? I mean, what was your job? I could have given him the sanitized version, told him I was a trainer, left it at that. Instead, I found myself saying I was an instructor. Special operations. Special operations. Derek's voice carried a new note of respect. Like, what kind of special operations? The morning air was still, broken only by the distant sound of boats on the water and the early preparations happening inside the club. I looked at this young man who was about to marry my niece, who thought he understood strength and discipline, made a decision that would change everything. "Navy SEALs," I said quietly. I was a SEAL instructor for the last 8 years of my service. Before that, I was operational for 14. Derek went completely still. The coffee cup in his hand stopped halfway to his lips, and I watched as every assumption he'd made about me crumbled in real time. "You're a Navy SEAL?" "Yes, for 22 years. Yes, Derek set his coffee down with shaking hands. "Jesus Christ, Mike, why didn't you ever? I mean, how did we not know this?" I turned to face him fully. "Because it's not who I am anymore. That was a different life, a different version of me. When I came home, I decided to be someone else. But you're a freaking Navy SEAL." Derek's voice cracked with disbelief. "Do you know what that means?" "Oh. You know what we were talking about last night? A groomsman and I were. Oh God, we were talking about how we could probably handle SEAL training." Despite myself, I almost smiled. I heard. Derek ran his hands through his carefully styled hair, not caring that he was messing it up. "Mike, I need you to understand something. My whole life, I've prided myself on being strong, on being disciplined. I work out every day. I've got my Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I push myself in business. And all this time, there's been a real Navy SEAL sitting at our family dinners. And I've been treating you like ... like ... double quotes, like the quiet uncle who fixes things I finished for him. I'm such an idiot." Derek's face flushed with embarrassment, and something deeper shame. "All those times I tried to. God, I probably sounded like such a poser to you." "Derek," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "you didn't know because I didn't want you to know. That was my choice. And nothing you've done or said has been wrong. You're a good man, or Sarah wouldn't be marrying you. But Derek wasn't letting himself off the hook that easily. Last night, when we were talking about that documentary about military discipline, you were right there, and you've actually lived it. You've actually done things that ... that most people can't even imagine. The weight of what he'd discovered was settling on him now. I could see him reassessing every interaction we'd ever had. Every casual conversation about strength and challenge and what it meant to be a man. The young financial advisor who thought he understood discipline was confronting the reality of someone who had lived it at its highest level. Can I ask you something? Derek's voice was quiet now, respectful in a way it had never been before. Why did you become a maintenance worker? I mean, after everything you accomplished. Everything. You could have done... I looked out at the water, choosing my words carefully, because I wanted to build things instead of ... other things. I wanted to fix what was broken instead of breaking what worked. I wanted a life where the biggest decision I had to make was which classroom needed new light bulbs. Derek was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. Mike, I need to ask you something, and please don't say no right away, would you? Would you consider giving a speech today? At the reception? I started to shake my head, but he held up his hand. Please, just listen. I've been thinking about what I want to say to Sarah, about marriage and commitment, and what it means to be a man she can count on, and I realized I've been learning from books and podcasts and motivational speakers, but there's been someone right here who actually knows what real strength looks like, what real commitment means. Derek, I appreciate what you're saying, but my groomsmen, my friends, we're all successful, but we're soft, Mike. We play at discipline, pretend we understand sacrifice. But you've actually lived it. You've made choices that most people never have to make, and you came home and chose to serve your family quietly, without recognition, without ego. The sun was higher now, and I could hear the wedding party arriving inside. Soon, this moment of unexpected honesty would be replaced by ceremony and celebration. By speeches from men who thought they understood what they'd never truly experienced. I don't know if I have anything worth saying, I told him honestly. Derek's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Mike, I've been trying to figure out how to be the man Sarah deserves. I thought it was about success, about being strong and ambitious and impressive. But looking at you now, knowing what I know, I think I've been measuring the wrong things. Before I could respond, Sarah's voice called from inside. Derek. Where are you? We need pictures. Derek straightened his jacket and wiped his eyes, but the change in him was unmistakable. The cocky confidence had been replaced by something deeper humility. Maybe, or a new understanding of what strength actually looked like. Will you think about it? He asked as we headed inside. The speech? I nodded, though I still wasn't sure. What I could possibly say that would matter to a room full of people who had already decided who I was and what I was worth. But Derek's discovery had shifted something fundamental. It's not just in how he saw me, but in how I saw myself reflected in his eyes. For the first time in years, someone was asking me to be more than the quiet uncle in the background. The question was whether I was ready to step back into the light. The wedding ceremony was flawless. Sarah looked radiant as she walked down the aisle, her hand resting on our father's arm. My brother David, who had always been the successful one, the one who spoke at family gatherings, the one everyone listened to. I sat in the back row, as expected, watching my niece promise her life to a man who now saw me completely differently than he had just hours before. Derek's vows were different than what he'd practiced at the rehearsal. Gone were the generic promises about providing and protecting, replaced by words about being worthy of trust, about earning respect through actions rather than demanding it through achievement. His eyes found mine during his speech. I saw a young man grappling with a new definition of strength. The reception began with the usual fanfare, the grand entrance. The first dance, the carefully choreographed celebration that Janet had been planning for months. I helped myself to the buffet and found my assigned seat at a side table with some of Sarah's college friends I'd never met. The conversation flowed around me, polite but superficial, and I settled into my familiar role as the quiet observer, but Derek had other plans. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, standing at the microphone as the dinner service ended, "before we begin the traditional speeches, I need to share something with you. This morning, I discovered something about someone in this room that has completely changed my perspective on what it means to be a man, what it means to serve, and what it means to be truly strong." A hush fell over the reception hall. I felt my stomach drop as I realized where this was heading. Several family members glanced in my direction, confused by the sudden shift in Derek's tone. For years, we've had someone among us who embodies everything I thought I understood about discipline, sacrifice, and quiet strength. Someone who served our country with distinction, who trained others to serve, and who came home and chose to serve his family without fanfare or recognition. Janet looked puzzled, scanning the room as if trying to figure out who Derek was talking about. Paul was checking his phone, clearly not paying attention. But Sarah was watching her new husband with growing understanding, and her eyes were beginning to shine with unshed tears. "Mike Stevens," Derek said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "Would you please stand up?" Every head in the room turned toward me. I felt the weight of 100 stares, the confusion and curiosity of people who had never really seen me before. My hands trembled slightly as I slowly rose from my chair. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet a man who served 22 years in the United States Navy. For 14 of those years, he was an operational Navy SEAL. For the last 8, he was an instructor, training the next generation of America's elite warriors." The silence in the room was deafening. I watched Janet's face go through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then something approaching shock. Paul had put down his phone and was staring at me with his mouth slightly open.
Ow.
My brother David looked like he'd been struck by lightning. "A Navy SEAL," Derek continued, his voice thick with emotion. "The man we've asked to move chairs and set up tables. The man who sits quietly at family dinners while we talk about our challenges and our achievements. The man who has served his country, his family, and his community without ever asking for recognition or respect." Someone in the crowd whispered, "Holy shit," and was quickly shushed by their companion. But the sentiment hung in the air. This revelation was shattering every assumption they'd made about the quiet man they'd barely noticed. This morning, Mike told me that he chose to be someone different when he came home. He chose to build things instead of ... other things. He chose to fix what was broken instead of breaking what worked. He chose service over recognition, humility over ego. Derek paused, his eyes glistening. "I thought I knew what strength looked like. I thought it was about success and achievement, and making sure everyone knew how disciplined and tough you were. But real strength sits quietly in the back row. Real strength doesn't need to announce itself. Real strength serves without expectation of reward." The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning humming overhead. Sarah was crying openly now, her hand pressed to her mouth. Even some of Derek's groomsmen, the same ones who had joked about being able to handle SEAL training, were looking at me with something approaching. "Mike," Derek said, his voice breaking slightly, "I was wrong to overlook you. We were all wrong. Would you please? Would you honor us with some words? Not as the quiet uncle in the corner, but as the man you really are." The walk to the microphone felt like the longest journey of my life. Every step carried the weight of 22 years of service, 15 years of carefully maintained anonymity, and a lifetime of being underestimated by the people who should have known me best. I reached the microphone and looked out at the sea, of faces, some shocked, some confused, some beginning to show something that might have been respect. I thought about all the times I'd bitten my tongue, all the conversations I'd endured about strength and discipline from people who had never been tested.
Oh.
All the years of being invisible in plain sight. "I didn't plan to speak today," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "For 15 years I've been content to be the quiet one, the helper, the man in the background. I thought that was what I wanted." I paused, finding Sarah's eyes in the crowd. She was looking at me with a mixture of love and apology, as if she was sorry for never asking, never pushing, never demanding that I be seen for who I really was. But Derek's right about one thing: I did choose to be different when I came home. I chose it because war changes you. Service changes you. When you've seen what happens when good people are asked to do impossible things, when you've held friends as they died, when you've made decisions that kept people alive or got them killed, you come home different. The room was breathlessly quiet now. Even the servers had stopped moving, transfixed by words they'd never expected to hear from the man they'd barely noticed. I became a SEAL because I wanted to serve something bigger than myself. I stayed for 22 years because I believed in the mission, in the men beside me, in the idea that some things are worth fighting for. But when I came home, I realized that service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. I looked directly at Derek, then at Sarah, then at my family members who were seeing me clearly for the first time in decades. True strength isn't about proving yourself to others. It's about being worthy of the trust people place in you. It's about showing up when you're needed, not when it's convenient. It's about doing what's right, even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching. My voice grew stronger as I continued, drawing on reserves of conviction I'd kept buried for too long. Derek, you asked me this morning about being the man Sarah deserves. Here's what I learned in 22 years of service. Worthiness isn't something you declare, it's something you demonstrate every day in small moments and big ones. It's keeping your word when keeping it costs you. It's being gentle with the people you love and fierce in defense of what matters. It's understanding that real power is restraint, that real courage is vulnerability, and that real strength is admitting when you're wrong and working to be better. I looked around the room at faces I'd known for years but who were seeing me for the first time. I chose to be quiet because I thought my war stories didn't matter anymore. The man I used to be wasn't relevant to the life I wanted to build. But maybe I was wrong about that. Maybe the lessons learned in service about commitment, about sacrifice, about never leaving anyone behind, maybe those lessons matter in every part of life. I turned back to Derek and Sarah, my voice softening. Marriage is a different kind of mission, but it requires the same things that kept my team alive. Absolute trust, unconditional commitment, and the willingness to put your partner's welfare above your own. Sarah, you're marrying a good man who's brave enough to admit when he doesn't know something and wise enough to learn from anyone who can teach him. I paused, overwhelmed by the sea of faces looking back at me for the first time in years. Derek, you don't need to be a Navy SEAL to be a good husband. You just need to be a man who shows up, who keeps his word, who serves his family the way I tried to serve my country, with honor, with humility, and with the understanding that the mission is always bigger than any one person. I stepped back from the microphone, my heart pounding, and returned to thunderous applause. But more than the applause, it was the looks on their faces that told me everything had changed, not just how they saw me, but how I saw myself. The quiet uncle was gone. In his place stood a man who had finally chosen to be fully present, fully himself. In front of the people who mattered most, the standing ovation seemed to go on forever. As I made my way back to my seat, hands reached out to touch my shoulder, to shake my hand, to make contact with someone they were seeing clearly for the first time. Derek was crying openly now, and Sarah had left the head table to embrace me, the first real hug I'd received from family in longer than I could remember. Uncle Mike, she whispered in my ear, I always knew there was more to you. I just never knew how to ask. The reception transformed after that moment. What had been polite conversation became genuine interest. People approached me not with the casual dismissal I'd grown accustomed to, but with respect and curiosity. Derek's groomsmen, the same men who had joked about military training the night before, sat with me during the dancing portion of the evening, asking questions with newfound humility. Mike, can I ask you something? Said Brad, Derek's best man, a successful corporate lawyer who collected expensive watches. When you were training other SEALs, what was the one thing that separated the ones who made it from the ones who didn't? Considered the question carefully. It wasn't physical strength, though that mattered. It wasn't even mental toughness, though that was crucial. It was the ability to suffer for something bigger than yourself. The guys who made it understood that their discomfort, their pain, their fear, none of that mattered compared to the man next to them. They could endure anything if it meant their teammate got home to his family. Brad nodded slowly. I don't think I've ever really suffered for anything, he admitted quietly. Not really. Not like that. Most people haven't, I replied. And that's not a bad thing. It means we did our jobs. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversations I'd never imagined having with my family. My brother David pulled me aside during the cake cutting, his face a mixture of shame and wonder. "Mike, why didn't you ever tell us? 22 years, Navy SEALs, and we never knew." I looked at this man who had always been the golden child, a successful businessman whose achievements the family celebrated at every gathering. Would it have mattered, David? Would you have listened differently if you'd known? He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. I hope so. But probably not. I was too busy talking about my own stuff to really hear anyone else. The war was over for me, I said. I wanted to be someone new, someone peaceful. Thought if I could just blend in, be helpful without being noticeable, I could leave all that behind. But you can't, can you? David asked. You can't just turn off 22 years of service. No, I admitted. You can't. And maybe I shouldn't have tried. Janet approached us, her earlier dismissiveness replaced by something I'd never seen. From her before uncertainty, maybe even vulnerability. "Mike, I owe you an apology," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent years treating you like you were less than us. Less successful, less important, less worth listening to. And all this time." "Janet, no. Let me finish. All this time, you were the one who had actually done something meaningful with your life. You served your country. You trained heroes. You made a difference in ways I can't even comprehend. When you came home, instead of demanding respect or recognition, you just ... helped. You showed up for every birthday, every holiday, every time someone needed something fixed or moved or built. You served us the same way you served your country, quietly, faithfully, without expecting anything in return." Tears were streaming down her face now. "I'm so sorry I never saw you. I'm so sorry I never asked." The evening was winding down when Derek found me again. The nervous groom from the morning had been replaced by a man who seemed somehow more solid, more grounded. "Mike, I need you to know something. What you said tonight. It's going to change how I approach my marriage, my life, everything. I've been chasing the wrong definition of strength my whole life. You're a good man, Derek. You were before you knew about me, and you are now. Don't let this revelation make you doubt everything you've accomplished. But it puts it in perspective, doesn't it? I mean, I've been so proud of my achievements, my discipline, my success. And they matter, I guess, but they're not. Not the same as what you did, what you sacrificed." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Derek, the world needs financial advisors too. It needs people who work hard and build businesses and take care of their families. There's honor in that. The difference isn't in what you do, it's in why you do it and how you treat people along the way. Will you? Will you be someone I can talk to? I mean, really talk to? I feel like I have so much to learn about what it really means to be a man, to be strong, to be worthy of Sarah. Of course. But Derek, you already are worthy of her. She wouldn't have chosen you if you weren't." As the reception ended and people began to drift away, I found myself in a role I hadn't occupied in 15 years, the center of attention. The man everyone wanted to shake hands with, to exchange contact information with, to make plans to see again soon. The cleanup crew was arriving as the last guests departed. I automatically began stacking chairs and clearing tables, the same tasks I'd performed hundreds of times before. But now family members who had never offered to help were working alongside me, asking about my service, my experiences, my thoughts, on everything from current events to life advice. As I loaded my pickup truck for what I thought would be the last time, Sarah appeared beside me in her wedding dress, still radiant despite the long day. "Uncle Mike, Derek and I have been talking. We want you to know that when we have children, we want them to know their great-uncle Mike. Not the quiet helper, but the man who served his country, who trained heroes, who came home and chose to serve his family with the same dedication." Felt something break open in my chest. A wall I'd built 15 years ago to protect myself from the weight of my own story. "I'd like that, Sarah. I'd like that very much. And Uncle Mike. Next family gathering, you're not sitting at the end of the table. You're not helping in the kitchen while everyone else talks. You're going to be part of the conversation, whether you like it or not." I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. "Yes, ma'am." As I drove home through Charleston's quiet streets that night, I reflected on how completely everything had changed in the span of a single day. The family that had overlooked me for 15 years now saw me as someone worth listening to. A young man who had married my niece had learned that strength comes in forms he'd never imagined. And I had rediscovered that the man I used to be and the man I chose to become weren't as separate as I'd believed. My apartment looked the same when I walked in, but it felt different. The photograph on my nightstand, my old SEAL team grinning at the camera, no longer felt like a relic from someone else's life. It felt like a bridge between who I was and who I was becoming. I'd spent 15 years trying to be invisible, thinking that service meant silence and strength meant staying in the background. But Derek's discovery and the events of that day had taught me something I should have known all along. Sometimes the greatest service could provide is letting people see who you really are. Tomorrow would bring phone calls from family members who wanted to hear my stories, invitations to gatherings where my voice would be welcomed and valued, and conversations about things that mattered. The quiet uncle was gone, replaced by someone more complete, a man who had served his country with honor and his family with love, and who was finally ready to do both openly. They never looked at me the same way again. More importantly, I never looked at myself the same way again. That, I realized, was exactly what needed to happen.